Hey guys, Andy and Spoken Label back in the house on a Sunday morning. Yes, a Sunday morning. My guest today's got me out of bed at an unholy hour because I'm usually still in bed at 11 o'clock in the morning. But anyway, listen, it is what it is. So, but yeah, we've got the fantastic Bethany Handley with me today. Now, Bethany, when did I met you last year, wasn't it? At Jamie Woods' book launch, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yes.
Yeah, I've been meaning to get him on since then, and it's just me being lazy. But Bethany wouldn't know that Jamie has been to me 6 months trying to get me to get Bethany on this podcast. But in fact, I'm really glad to hear that and we've got it sorted out because it took a bit of planning, but life gets that way, and you'll see why. Now, Bethany, obviously, take us back in time, man, and tell us about where did all your creativity come from originally?
That's a really good question. Um, I've always been really creative. I've always loved any kind of arts project or I've always loved writing from like a really young age. My grandma is a incredible artist, so I started painting with her and she kind of taught me how to paint. And some of my earliest memories are watching her produce these incredible canvases of mountains and seascapes. So I think it's in my DNA. But I didn't really start writing poetry until I was in my teens, and I ended up spending quite a bit of time in hospital, in and out of hospital with chronic illnesses. And it was the first time where I couldn't really read fiction. Like reading fiction had always been really important to me, but I just
Hmm.
couldn't read novels anymore. They were a bit too long for my so I really struggled with fatigue. So I started reading poetry and then started writing poetry as a way to, I guess, regain some agency over what was happening. Um, yeah, so I've always been creative.
Oh, fantastic. No, I get you completely with it. My case has been, I started writing when I was 10 and I'm 52 now. So it's always been in my blood. Yeah. My family are all readers. So I'm always a believer in creativity. If you've got a prompt from me, if something's triggered you on it, whether it's health or your family or something, there's something that always leads to it. So yeah, I get you completely with that. Now, obviously, like if people research you, obviously, there's a lot of stuff going around. You've been involved in quite a lot of stuff here. So, and I want to learn first of all, because on your bio, and people will see this, you've been named as one of the UK's 10 most influential disabled people in politics, law, and media by the Shaw Trust in 2024, which is incredible. Now, I hate having to pick you up so quickly, but where did this come from?
Thank you. So it's for my work with campaigning for better access to nature.
Mm.
Um, in my media work around trying to raise awareness of the barriers that disabled people experience in accessing nature, but in also we've seen the a violation of disabled people's human and legal rights over the last few years. So I've been doing a lot of campaigning around trying to just raise awareness of what it feels like to have your rights violated and have to fight for basic necessities like accessible housing or the right wheelchair. So that award was for recognising that work.
Respect to you straight away because there's something to be proud of that straight away. But people will see this more shortly. Now, obviously, you talked about a lot about the country, and the countryside is a massive part of your writing. I know that straight away. It's who you are as a person. And I was fascinated to learn, obviously, you're an ambassador for Country Living's Access for All. Now, where did this come from, then?
I'd started writing about access to nature and all the barriers I was experiencing as a new wheelchair user, trying to access really rural landscapes. And uh, also, I think it's really interesting having a Welsh identity. It's so rooted in Welsh identity that you access like the mountains. For example, I remember living uh, with an English housemate during uni, and he was saying over spaghetti that you couldn't have the Welsh experience until you climbed Penny Dan. There's this very interesting relationship between like Welshness, Welsh identity, and accessing these like quite extreme rural landscapes. So I was writing about that, and then Country Living approached me, and they were building a similar campaign where they were trying to raise awareness of mainly the physical barriers that disabled people experience accessing nature. And they've put together this interactive map which shares accessible routes from around the UK. It's really beautiful, and they're trying to publish in their print magazine disabled people's recommendations of accessible holidays and accessible walks. So
Fantastic,
doing
yeah.
some really fabulous work.
I'll respect them straight away for that. I get you completely. Now, obviously, on the poetry side, I know you've done some work with Poetry Wales, haven't you? Next, so I want to learn about that next. And how did this come about?
Yeah, so I've been lucky to be published by Poetry Wales a few times now, and they were one of the first magazines that published my work actually. So they were very influential in giving me a boost and giving me a platform. So it's been really fantastic working with Poetry Wales.
Yeah, and obviously the same obviously applies for Literature Wales, doesn't it? When you're in really representing Wales in 2003 to 24, that's a heck of an achievement. Is that a similar sort of story to Poetry Wales? Is it?
Literature Wales completely changed my life. So they supported me with opportunities. They introduced me to the writing community, and a lot of my best mates came out of working with Literature Wales. They supported me financially, and it was at a really important time. So I started the Representing Wales program of support. I think a few weeks before I ended up losing all movement and sensation below the waist. So I actually missed the first week because I was in hospital. And so having that support as a writer while I was going through like completely life-changing circumstances was incredible. And I don't think I'd be writing now if I hadn't had the support of Literature Wales. And also very early on, before that, they supported me in working with a good writer friend, Megan and Hwnt, to develop a writing scheme for young deaf and disabled Welsh writers. So we did a little residential, and that's how the anthology that we have just published of deaf and disabled writers came to be actually as well. So yes, Literature Wales are incredible. The work they do is incredible, and I wouldn't be a writer without them.
Definitely. Now, we people wonder about that anthology Beyond. We will be talking about that shortly. But before we do that, I want to go on to Bethany's debut collection and published by Seren Books, Cling Film. Now, oh, I thought Cling Film is. It's Cling Film, isn't it? After I've done that. But yeah, first of all, I want to learn about the origin of this collection. Where did it come from originally?
I worked on this pamphlet for a few years, but I I was born disabled. I was born visually impaired, but I didn't know I was disabled. I didn't meet anyone with a visual impairment. I didn't have anyone that helped me to try and mitigate some of the barriers I was experiencing. The only people I met around my impairment were surgeons who suggested that I needed fixing, and the problem was my eyesight uh, and not society for not adapting. So it wasn't really until I was in my teens and developed chronic illnesses that affected my mobility that I really started to experience ableism and realize that ableism uh, was everywhere. So I became a part-time wheelchair user, um, and I just couldn't believe all the ableist intrusions I was experiencing every day. So I started to write poems about it to bear witness, to document all the ableist intrusions and discrimination that I was experiencing. And I felt so dehumanized by all these barriers, whether or not it was not being able to get into the university building or whether or not it was a stranger on Cardiff High Street asking me what happened and why I use a wheelchair. So this writing this collection enabled me to regain my dignity and my agency and to feel like I had some power whilst living in a ableist and inaccessible world.
No, yeah, of course, of course. No, I get you. I understand you completely with that, and I agree. So, well, as obviously people know me when I do talk about people's collections and stuff, I do a well, I can't do the full deep dive because I'll be at about 4 o'clock in the evening with every piece. But I've picked out, as I've told you in advance, a number of pieces I'm going to talk about specifically, and there's 5 pieces in this. Now, I love the fact, first of all, obviously, you started the collection off with it's almost like an album with the title song in the beginning of it, Cling Film. Now, I'll say, I want to learn, first of all, just a couple of questions I want to ask about this, and we'll talk about the stylistic choices first in it. Because this is a very, very strong and personal piece here. I can see that straight away. And I loved very much liked the crossings out throughout the piece and the bits of the italics and the formatting. Before we get into the decision of why start the collection off with that, but tell us about the background of this piece and how it developed.
Yeah, so it's called cling film because there are two things that I really hate in life,
Mm,
ableism and cling film.
mm.
But
Fair point. I'm in the same boat there, yeah.
yeah, it's fascinating suddenly using a wheelchair and suddenly my chronic illnesses were visible to the world and just experiencing these intrusions every day that were relentless. And I wanted to try and find a way to communicate that to a non-disabled audience, I guess, of how it feels to have that relentless discrimination. But the effect of that when you live with those daily intrusions is it feels like you can't access the world. Like even if you're moving with your friends, you're moving with your community, you're in society, you don't feel like you can access it. It's like the world has been wrapped in cling film and you can't touch anything, that you can't actually be completely present because you've always got these barriers that you're having to fight every day.
Yeah, no, I agree. Agree completely with that. Yeah, no, agree completely. That's a great point indeed. What made you want to start off this collection with this poem? Was there a specific reason behind it?
Yeah, I think it's quite an angry poem.
Yeah. Well, old saying I use is no shit, Sherlock.
Yeah, yeah, I was furious when I wrote this poem. I just had enough. I couldn't believe all these barriers that I was experiencing and that I was quite new to. I had the privilege of having not a non-disabled body, but close. I wasn't experiencing a lot of barriers. So suddenly experiencing all these barriers, I was raging and I didn't know what to do with this rage. But I think anger can be an incredibly powerful, energizing force. So I wanted to start this collection with that anger, and then the whole thing from this pamphlet kind of charts my journey not away from anger. I'm still angry, but towards joy and towards learning how to find joy and to be so proud of my body and to kind of quieten down the other voices, the ableist voices and the barriers that I was experiencing to focus on my own disabled joy.
Yeah, no, I get completely with it as well. Yeah, obviously, if people see it, there's a lot going on in this piece, and it's a multi-page poem anyway. Now, I'm presuming this poem, I bet you must have took you quite some time to develop there, 'cause it's not a piece I don't think you could have knocked off in half an hour. Certainly not.
No, you say that. This came out fully formed. I think
Did it
I'd
really? Oh,
had,
wow.
yeah, it is. I think I'd
Wow.
had all these barriers just going round and round in my head.
Mm.
And this was just, yeah, it came out. A lot of my poems do come out pretty much fully formed. I've already written them in my head, but this was definitely one of those that just came out with all that emotion, with all that anger.
Yeah, I've got a friend that writes like that, and I didn't know about this piece. It's one of those where they felt like to me, and it shows you how wrong someone's looking at a collection even when you've not wrote it. I visualised that could take you months to write of all the crossings out and the moving around and stuff. But
They came out.
I've got a friend that writes like that, and he can have a poem stewing around his head for months. So I've known him do it for 18 months, 2 years before now, and he'll sit down and write it all in an hour, and it can be really technical stuff. So it's fascinating. That it's. I think the easy word is you're living your life before you write it, aren't you? Then so
Definitely. And like yes, I kind of wish that wasn't the case, that I didn't have to live all of it, that I could actually write from my imagination. But no, I had like, yeah, this is all from a product of experiencing that discrimination. And I've
yeah,
hardly edited this poem actually. This is how it came out.
yeah. It's a good. I think it's a great choice for first piece because in the book because a lot of it is you're looking back. I agree with you, to look forward. It's like sometimes it's like you're on a fence, and that's what I saw this piece straight away. You're looking back at your life before, then you can walk forward, which is like the walking forwards into the collection. I saw that straight away. That's what my thoughts were. Yeah, good. Okay, contrast now. The next piece I want to talk about is a three-line poem, and I think the title is almost as long as the poem, actually. Poems submitted by male doctors. Now, this is really damning because I've had very similar experiences with diabetes and my local doctors, so I know exactly what you mean there. Obviously, I don't want to go into bad mouthing the NHS because we won't, but what was the conscious decision to actually write this very short poem?
Yeah, so I wanted all these interruptions, these ableist interruptions that I was experiencing in my everyday life to be poems, to come out as ready form poems. So I was so upset and angry at the level of medical misogyny I've experienced. I think, especially as a young disabled person, um, I had at 18 a doctor tell me to just get pregnant, it will help with the pain. So that quote has been printed in this collection, just how he said it.
Shocking.
Um,
Shocking.
I've had doctors say, again, as in this poem, you're too young to be a wheelchair user, or you'll grow out of it when I've got a genetic condition. That's not how it's going to work. Um, so yeah, the comments were so dehumanizing and sexist and charged. So I wanted to feature them as poems. And I think when I experienced ableism in its undiluted form, I just think now that's a poem. That's gonna be a poem. The world needs to bear witness to this, that we think this is acceptable for doctors to speak to people like that.
I think it's a great choice that because there's a one. I'm not going to go into the small. There's a couple of other very short poems in the book that they serve as interludes almost to the story itself. But I think you tell a lot in the three lines there, and I think very very effective indeed.
And
Now,
that's kind of how I had to live my life, but it is always interrupted by these ridiculous statements and these like this evidence that our society is so deeply ableist.
yeah,
So I don't think I could write a poetry collection that wasn't interrupted by these barriers, by this
yeah,
discrimination.
yeah. No, good point. Great point indeed. So now, contrast on the next piece I want to talk about is, and this is a complete different poem. This one, and probably my favourite piece in the book actually is a Swift's Flight. Now, people look at this, so I read up my notes so you can see what I'm thinking here. I really like the use of distance in this piece and then what you held back in when you wrote, because people see the poem, they will know it's about you. But I love the fact you've done it as a she. And I think it's that second person. It's not third person anyway. It's not the first person. I think it's second person. And if I'd done it, it'd at least been no correction. If you'd done it in an I or like Bethany as well as the third person, it would have been a very different poem. But because you've done it as a she, it gives it sometimes that kind of real distance and it's very, very effective.
Mm. Yeah, and I wanted to incorporate the Swift's
Mm.
flight and the experience of the Swift as well. I think being chronically ill completely changed the way I looked at nature, and in my own fragility, I saw the world's fragility around me, and it just completely changed how I empathized with other animals, other species around me. So I wanted to use that distance so that there was equality between the Swift and yeah, the girl learning how to use a wheelchair for the first time in this poem.
Yeah, very. It works really well, really, really well. It does, and it's. I think, in contrast to some other ones, it's a softer sounding poem as well. If you look at it like it's, I can see from you compare it to the first piece and then this one, it's a completely different tone. The tone's different, but it works really well because it is you. You can see it's everything is about you. It does, but it's just a very powerful piece.
Yeah, I didn't want this poem to be angry. It's about learning to use a wheelchair for the first time. And I think people assume that that would be tragic and that that would be sad and depressing. It's not at all. Wheelchairs are so beautiful. It like my wheelchair enables my freedom, my joy, my adventures. So I wanted this to be a beautiful poem where we're celebrating that and the flight that having a mobility aid gives you. Um, yeah, so it's not an angry poem like
But
some of
no,
them.
yeah, I think you've got to when you do a collection like you've done here. Not everything has to be angry because I think when you're looking at where your life goes and things go wrong and stuff, like I know some diabetes is it changes your life, but it doesn't have to be negative. It
Mm.
just takes you in a different direction. You can be positive. Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, onto something that's like another piece now, which is not one of the angrier poems in the book, but I think it's very structured, very very clever. And from what I suspect you've been telling me, I bet you wrote this poem probably in a sitting as well. If I could walk tomorrow, if there was a miracle or something. Now, I loved this piece. The repetition works really well on it. It's I'd like in it throughout the full thing, and then the occasional line drop-offs. So, obviously, was this a poem you stewed over in your head for quite a while then, was it, before you wrote it, was it?
Yeah, this is another that arrived on the page fully formed. Yeah, I think I'd again, I was just thinking about all the barriers that I experience and how different life would be if I suddenly could walk tomorrow. But that's not saying that I want to, or that not walking is tragic. And I think that's what this poem explores as well. Maybe when you're starting to read it, you think, oh, this sad that like I can't hug my parents standing up, for example. But actually, led by the end of the poem, like I pirouette so fast on wheels, I can clear a whole dance floor when I'm doing wheelies in my wheelchair, and you can't do that on feet. Like I love my wheelchair and the freedom it enables. And again, I want this poem to be a celebration of that, whilst acknowledging that yes, you do experience a lot of barriers as a wheelchair, but not because of your wheelchair enabled body, because of systemic inequalities.
Yeah, no, I get you completely. No, I agree with you. And it's a really good piece because again, it's a longer piece, but I think danger is something when you do a poem like what you've done here, you can lose your audience by overdoing it. But I think it's worked really well because the line drop-offs had a lot to it as well. So yeah, fantastic piece. Right, the last piece we're going to talk about this collection is probably the angriest, and I thought it's a good time to wrap up with this one here. Now, yeah, people know this, know me and know me. I worked in the job centre twice over the years, and the once the employment was in the job centre, and work photos interviews are the most degrading things a person can go through, no matter what your background is. And that's where this poem really, really hit me with this one. So I can certainly see what it's almost like discrimination you suffered, almost as bad as what you suffered from the doctors, really, with this one. Now, I'd be interested to know how you wrote this piece. I think there's a pent up, this really is probably the most angry poem in the collection, which deserved. But where did the
Yeah,
idea come from? There's two lines in it where you get the plus sign for the money and the minus up and down like that. Tell us a bit more about this.
yeah. So I first applied for universal credit when I was in hospital, unable to sit up. Um, so I couldn't move at all. And I had to have these dehumanizing phone calls that ask, how are you preparing for work? You need to set a goal. If you want to have even like a basic amount of money that's not enough to live off, you need to tell us how you're preparing for work. So my work focused goal for 1 month was to learn to sit up. And I actually had to agree to that. It's just such a absurd, dehumanizing process when obviously the last thing in my mind was preparing for work when I couldn't move. Um, and then like the next month, it was my work related goal I had to agree on was learn to sit in a wheelchair. It's just absurd system, and I think we all assume that we have this safety net in this country, where if you have a life changing injury or illness, you have the support of the state, and that you will have enough to live off. And we all hear those horrible narratives in the media about benefit scroungers and benefit frauds, but it's really not an issue statistically. It's not an issue. It accounts to such a small negligible percentage of spending, and the reality is that people that really need it don't have enough to live off. So I was entitled, before pending a work capability assessment where they decide whether or not you got basically able to work in future. I was entitled to £292 a month to live off. So I just like ignorantly, I hadn't realised quite how dehumanising and yeah, just ridiculous and cruel the benefit system was.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. It's well, long story short, of me is, and I'm not telling you this, Bethany, but I worked at the same job for 10 years and I ended up having to leave it when they shut it down. And I struggled for probably 2 years I did. And I was on and off benefits. And me and my wife both really struggled in this one. And each time you've gone in there and it's half the time I feel, it's my bad mouth, it's a struggle. I don't think they're here to support you, just tick boxes sometimes.
Yeah, they're not at all, and I think it's actually getting worse. But this poem, so I kept notes throughout these calls with the job centre. I kept notes, and some of the ableism that I experienced that from a member of staff at a job centre was horrific. And this is during like the worst few months of my life following life-changing illness, and I had to put up with this level of discrimination. Uh, yeah, it was. I just couldn't believe it, and as they were speaking on the phone, I was thinking, this has to be a poem. I have to raise awareness that you can be spoken to like this in your worst days, and that you have to fight for the right to live. We shouldn't have that in this society. And we know that last year, the United Nations found that the UK government had been violating the human and legal rights of disabled people in the UK. And it hasn't improved at all. In fact, some of the new uh, discussions that are happening at the moment make it sound like it might get worse. But I think, yeah, I think we're privileged if we don't know the reality of what it's like, and we don't see the stories of what it's actually like to claim benefits. So
Yeah.
we need more stories, and we need more people to talk about it. But there's still such a culture of shame and stigma, isn't there, around claiming
Yeah.
benefit?
Yeah. There is somewhat as a society we need to overcome. And it's like, I think your piece here is a fantastic piece for that, 'cause you've raised a awful lot of points there. And it's like that's afford to the use of the money thing going up and down. We're in a very capitalist society anyway, whether we like it or not. And I think it shows what you need to survive on. Yeah. Powerful piece. Really, really powerful piece. I'm glad you put that in there, John. It's put a lot of bad memories back for me, but memories we all need to discuss, definitely.
Mm.
Now, as I said before, it's a chapbook, that, but I'm hopefully we're going to get a full-length collection from you someday, definitely, 'cause I'd love to read more in that. But the other project you've done that's come out recently, which I wasn't aware of until you told me about it, was the Beyond. Now, I'll let you tell people, obviously, first of all, what Beyond is.
So Beyond is an anthology of Welsh deaf and disabled writers. So it's a mix of fiction, non-fiction, and poetry by some of Wales's best deaf and disabled writers and emerging deaf and disabled writers as well. And it's joyfully defiant. It's such a beautiful collection of work and of very different experiences and very different writing styles. It's really, really gorgeous. And it's also, we say it's bilingual. We haven't translated the pieces that are in Welsh. We thought a lot about it. So I edited it with two Welsh language writers, Megan and Hwnt, and Shauna Darren Hughes. And we talked a lot about whether or not to translate, and there's a lot of pressure to translate and to have the English next to the Welsh. But the disabled community is already a marginalised community, minoritised community, and the Welsh language is so minoritised. We didn't want to translate it, and I think that is the context we live in Wales. If you don't speak Welsh, tough. You kind of have to learn it, or you miss out, and that's just how it happens, isn't it? When you don't speak a language, you miss out. So we wanted to not translate it and not decontextualize the work, just to have the English and Welsh side by side, resisting translation.
Yeah, you've done this with it. It gives it the freedom, the uncenteredness. See, I agree with you completely. With it. It's like my Welsh is, well, non-existent, but I love to see it on the page. And I was just imagine it breathing out, and there was anger and defiance, even if I couldn't read it. And I thought, yeah, makes perfect sense to me straight away with that. Now, like you said before with this, this is a book you've done this with several other people. Now, how did this compare to doing your own collection in the sense of working with other people and then looking at other people's works?
Yeah, it was really, really interesting because every piece in there is so different. The styles are so different, the themes are so different. Um, so editing was it was really tricky actually. We had a lot of conversations around how much should you edit? Are you decontextualizing the piece if you edit it so much? I think as deaf and disabled writers, we can write our bodies and write our way of experiencing the world. So through editing it and correcting grammar, or are we changing are we challenging someone's context? And so we had a lot of very interesting discussions around editing this. But also one of the biggest barriers to editing this that I hadn't thought of was that a lot of writers didn't identify as disabled. So we had a lot of questions around, am I disabled enough to submit to this anthology? Which was fascinating that I think we all internalize ableism, and that these disabled writers were challenging their own identities and thinking that they couldn't possibly contribute, which was fascinating. But we also wanted to use social model of disability as a framework. So that's the idea that people aren't disabled by their impairments, but by our inaccessible and ableist society. So it was really interesting having discussions with people who have lived with chronic conditions or mental ill health or whatever impairment someone was living with, or whether or not someone was neurodivergent, and having these conversations around, okay, so do you identify as disabled? Would you be happy for your work to be included in this community? given that it's not your impairment or it's not neurodivergence that is disabling you. Yeah, it's a really fascinating process.
Yeah, I bet it was as well. It's like I think when you do it as teamwork, because like my wife's done a couple of anthologies, and it's like, and I've been team member of it basically. And I let her decide what she wants to do, but I'm there to support it, and I will question her on certain things. But how it was a fascinating process. You even get if you're looking at work together and stuff like that, thinking, I know I used to have massive disagreements with Amanda saying, well, you can't put that in there because that don't go with that. And did you get that sort of like, bounce between the three of you when you were selecting pieces for this book?
Yeah, a little bit. And we were also very aware that we wanted to rip apart a lot of the really harmful disability stereotypes around how it's really tragic to be disabled. Or so it was really hard balance because there are a lot of things that are really challenging about being disabled because you're living in a world not designed for you. So we wanted to give writers room to write about that, but we also wanted a collection that is joyful and that is a celebration and that shows pride in our deaf or disabled identities. So it was really, really challenging trying to find the right mood for the whole collection when we want to give both the difficulties of being disabled and the pride and the joy that comes of being disabled room. So that was quite a hard process.
Yeah, it sounds like it straight away. I can believe you straight away with that. Now, what is this a sort of thing? Would you like to do this again in the future, this sort of anthology?
Yeah, what's been really amazing is speaking to the writers who have published for the first time in this
Yeah,
anthology.
oh yeah, always is, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and how life-changing that is. And I remember the first time I was published in a magazine, and it does give you so much confidence, doesn't it? And show you that people want to hear your voice. Uh, so I would like to give that opportunity to more people and to continue to build this platform. I think this anthology has shown the need, and I've had people messaging me saying they read it and feel less alone now, which is makes it so worthwhile.
Completely.
But yeah, this is the start. The deaf and disabled community definitely are still forced silent. So we need to create more opportunities to give
Yeah.
people platforms, and especially now that a lot of so many literary magazines have been lost recently, and funding is a massive problem. So there aren't many of these opportunities to publish for the first time, which are so important for for your confidence as a writer.
Yeah, no, agreed. Agreed you completely with that. It's horrible at the moment out there. I agree with you. So, okay, you've got one piece in this collection. I think we should talk, I wanted to talk about it separately. So, now, obviously, people will know, obviously, this one's in your collection as well. But having it in the book here gives it a different context as well. 'Cause obviously, I think it's one of your most, I'm not saying angry, I use the word stark. Okay, it's very, it's, I don't know, there's something a bit different about this piece to me. And tell us about when I say I'm tired. I'll let you go into this one.
Yeah, so this piece, I use three words and kind of investigate their many meanings and contexts uh, for my disabled body. So I use rest, enough, and adapt, and think about the like ecological definition, and then the you like tie in the barriers like experience as a disabled person, um and kind of a celebration as well. So I guess it's kind of a collage, this poem of yeah, of the different meanings that can coexist. Um
Yeah. No, it makes sense. That completely does. Like it's, I think it's probably your most experimental pieces as well, the way you analyze it as well. So yeah, it's a fantastic piece. It
Thank
deserves to
you.
be in both beyond and your collection as well.
Thank
Now,
you.
starting to wrap up now, obviously we'll get you to review pieces after this as the second and third parts. But and you've told me a little bit about this off camera already. So we'll have to be beat around the bush very carefully what we say here for legal reasons. But what do you have planned next?
So I would like to do a full poetry collection at some point. That so this is a pamphlet because I wanted it to be intense and to be able to have a mixture of quite heavy poems with and very experimental poems with some more beautiful. So I wanted the reader to have quite an intense experience, and that you can read it in one as well because it's a bit shorter, so you can see my journey through these barriers to learn to live with joy, in these few pages. So I would like to do a poetry collection that's a bit broader. Um, but I'm also currently working on a non-fiction book, which I'm very excited about. But unfortunately, I can't tell you much more at this point.
No. We will be getting people are wondering, Bethany will, but hopefully coming back on Spoken Label, we could probably say release say it's probably going to be next year, can't we?
Yes, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, we'll say that. We'll leave it at that and we'll get you back on. I've been asking you a few questions off camera and some there's things I can't talk about, but I'm very, very interested in this. So we'll talk further. Now, obviously, Bethany, hard sell time then, first of all, to wrap up with, where can people, first of all, find you on social media and beyond if they want to get in touch with you?
So I'm on most social media platforms. I'm just Bethany Handley on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and I've also got a website where I've got links to a lot of my work. So my website's bethanyhandley.com.
Perfect. Yeah, go do everything for the website first. That's what I did. So, and I'll see what happens. Now, I'll say, Bethany, first of all, then, where can people get hold of your debut collection, Cling Film?
So you can order Cling Film from any bookshop in the UK, preferably your local one. It's available to order. And yes, and beyond the anthology of deaf and disabled writers, it's also available to order from either the Lucent Dreaming website or from any UK bookshop.
As I always say, good and evil booksellers, right? So I'm
Yeah.
hacking that one off the Empire Film podcast. But yeah, I've just seen it online, and when I'm back from being away for a couple of days, I'm definitely going to order, but get into ordering both of these. I can promise you that now. So.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, well, that's all my questions today, Bethany. We've chatted for ages here as well. So everybody, we're going to take a quick break and Bethany's going to do some pieces in the second half. So thank you again, Bethany. I've really enjoyed this today.
Thank you for having me.
We will see you all in two shakes of the dice.